12 doctors failed to cure the Vampire King's wife, but a homeless delivery girl healed her instantly. The manor rose from the hillside like something out of a fever dream, all Gothic spires and shadowed turrets that seemed to claw at the night sky. Sarah Mitchell stared at it through the cracked screen of her phone, certain the GPS had finally lost its mind. She stood shivering at the base of the iron gates, her delivery bag clutched against her chest. The November wind cut through her threadbare jacket, the same one she'd been wearing for 8 months, since before everything fell apart. Her bike leaned against the stone wall behind her, its front tire held together with duct tape and prayers. $7. That's what she'd made tonight after 4 hours of deliveries. $7 that wouldn't cover Lily's cough medicine and dinner. Her 12-year-old sister was waiting under the bridge right now, wrapped in the sleeping bag Sarah had stolen from a donation bin, probably trying not to cough too loud in case it attracted the wrong kind of attention. When the notification had pinged 20 minutes ago, Sarah had almost ignored it. The address was too far, the neighborhood too wealthy, the timing too strange, 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. But then she'd seen the payment, $500 for a single delivery. $500 meant a week in a motel. Hot showers. Real food. Medicine for Lily's chest infection that was getting worse by the day. Sarah had accepted before she could talk herself out of it. Now, standing before these gates that belonged in a horror movie, she wondered if survival was worth whatever waited on the other side. The package in her bag felt lighter than it should, almost weightless. She'd picked it up from a courier station she'd never heard of, in a part of the city that didn't match any map. The sender was listed as anonymous. No return address. Just the delivery location and that impossible payment amount. The gates stood open, as if expecting her. Sarah's phone buzzed. A message from the app. Customer is waiting. Please proceed to front door. She thought about Lily, about the way her sister's breathing had sounded this morning, wet and labored. She thought about the $7 in her pocket that wouldn't be enough. She thought about how invisibility felt after 2 years on the streets, how people looked through her like she was made of glass. Okay, she whispered to no one. Okay. Sarah pushed her bike through the gates, the wheels crunching on gravel that probably cost more than everything she owned. The pathway curved through dead gardens where stone fountains stood frozen mid-spray. Gargoyles leered from the corners of the building, their expressions caught between agony and ecstasy. The front door was enormous, solid oak bound with iron, the kind of door that belonged to fortresses and nightmares. Sarah leaned her bike against the stone steps and climbed, each footfall echoing louder than it should. She raised her hand to knock, but the door opened before her knuckles touched wood. The woman who stood in the doorway was the most beautiful thing Sarah had ever seen, and the most terrifying. She was tall and impossibly elegant, dressed in dark clothes that looked expensive even to Sarah's untrained eye. But it was her face that made Sarah's breath catch, pale as moonlight, with eyes that reflected the porch light like an animal's. Those eyes were filled with something Sarah recognized intimately, desperation. The delivery, Sarah managed, her voice rough from disuse. She held out the package with shaking hands. I have. You're the delivery girl. The woman's voice was soft, but carried weight, like velvet wrapped around steel. Her gaze dropped to Sarah's worn clothes, her thin frame, the dirt under her fingernails. Something shifted in her expression, not pity exactly, but recognition. Thank the darkness. Come inside, quickly. I just need a signature, Sarah said, pulling out her phone. The app requires. The woman reached out and grasped Sarah's wrist. Her fingers were cold as ice, stronger than they should be. There's no time for that. My queen is dying. 12 doctors have tried and failed. You're carrying the only thing that can save her. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to drop the package and flee back to the relative safety of the streets. But those eyes held her frozen, desperate, terrified, and somehow familiar in their fear. I don't understand, Sarah whispered. It's just a package. I don't know what's in it. I'm just... Please. The woman's grip tightened, urgent but not cruel. Every second matters. Whatever you're afraid of, I promise you're safe here. But she won't be if we wait any longer. Sarah thought of Lily again, thought of the $500 that could mean the difference between her sister's life and death. She thought about how she'd learned to measure risk over 2 years of surviving impossible situations, how she developed instincts for real danger versus the merely uncomfortable. This woman was terrifying, but she wasn't lying. The fear in her eyes was real. Okay, Sarah heard herself say. Show me. The woman released her wrist and stepped back, gesturing into the darkness beyond the door. Sarah took a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff and crossed the threshold into a world of shadows and secrets. She didn't know she was walking toward destiny. Didn't know the weightless package in her bag contained liquid miracles. Didn't know that in the next few minutes, she would save a life, change a world, and transform from invisible homeless girl into something that would reshape history itself. She only knew that $500 meant hope, and that sometimes hope required walking through doors that should stay closed. The door shut behind her with a sound like a tomb ceiling. And Sarah Mitchell's impossible story began. The woman pulled Sarah through corridors that seemed to stretch impossibly long, their footsteps echoing on marble floors that gleamed like ice. Candles flickered in iron sconces, but stranger lights floated near the ceiling, orbs that pulsed with soft luminescence, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Servants appeared and disappeared in doorways, moving with a fluid grace that made Sarah's skin prickle. They didn't walk so much as glide, and none of them made any sound. What is this place? Sarah gasped, struggling to keep up. Somewhere that shouldn't exist, the woman replied without slowing. Somewhere you were meant to find. They stopped before massive double doors carved with images. Sarah couldn't quite focus on figures dancing or fighting, she couldn't tell which. The woman pushed them open, and the scene beyond stole what little breath Sarah had left. The bedchamber was vast enough to swallow Sarah's entire bridge shelter 50 times over. A canopy bed dominated the space, draped in midnight silk that seemed to absorb the light. And in that bed lay a woman so beautiful it hurt to look at her, skin like porcelain, hair the color of honey spread across pillows, but her lips were blue and her chest barely moved. Around the bed stood 12 figures, and Sarah's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. An old man in robes that looked ancient, covered in symbols she didn't recognize. A woman in a crisp modern suit, stethoscope hanging uselessly around her neck. A figure in what might have been tribal garments from a continent Sarah couldn't name. Others in clothes spanning centuries, all of them wearing the same expression of defeated exhaustion. But it was the man kneeling beside the bed who made Sarah forget how to breathe. He was tall even kneeling, with dark hair shot through with silver at the temples. His face was carved from stone and sorrow, aristocratic features held rigid against emotion that Sarah could feel radiating from him like heat. When he looked up at their entrance, his eyes hit her like a physical force, pale gray, the color of winter storms, ancient and terrible and desperate. The delivery girl, the woman who'd brought Sarah, announced. She has it. Every eye in the room fixed on Sarah, and she wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and escape back to the streets where at least she understood the rules. The package, the man said, his voice rough. Quickly. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled the small box from her bag. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a crystal vial no bigger than her thumb. The liquid inside shifted colors as she lifted it, silver bleeding into gold, then back again, like watching dawn and dusk at the same time. A piece of paper lay beneath it. Sarah unfolded it with shaking fingers. The instructions were simple, written in handwriting that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at it. Asterisk 3 drops on her lips. No more, no less, asterisk. I don't know if this will work, Sarah whispered, approaching the bed. I'm not a doctor. I'm just... Please. The man's voice cracked on the word. Try. Sarah uncorked the vial. The liquid smelled like rain and starlight, if such things had a scent. She counted carefully: 1 drop, 2 drops, 3, placing them on the dying woman's blue lips. Nothing happened. Sarah's heart sank. $500 for nothing. Whatever this was, it was just another cruel joke in a life full of them. Then the woman in the bed gasped. Her eyes flew open, brilliantly green, alive, shocked. Color flooded back into her skin like watching time reverse. Her chest expanded with a full breath, then another. The 12 doctors stumbled backward in disbelief. Several made sounds that might have been prayers in languages Sarah didn't know. The man at the bedside made a sound between a sob and a laugh, grasping the woman's hand as she sat up, fully conscious, looking around with growing wonder. "Lucian," she breathed, and her voice was music. "I thought I was dying." "You were," he said, pressing her hand to his face. "You were, and now you're not, and I don't understand." His eyes found Sarah again, and this time the intensity in them made her take a step back. He rose to his full height, towering over her, and crossed the distance between them in 2 strides that seemed too fast. "Who sent you?" "Not angry, but urgent, needful." "Who gave you that package?" "Who told you to come here?" Sarah fumbled for her phone, pulling up the delivery app with numb fingers. The notification was gone. The entire job had vanished as if it never existed. Her account showed no record of the pickup, the address, the $500 payment that had drawn her here. Sarah's voice failed. She tried again. It was just there. A delivery request. "I don't know who sent it." The sender was listed as anonymous. The woman in the bed, Evelindra, Lucian had called her, was studying Sarah with those impossibly green eyes. Someone wanted her here specifically. Someone with power enough to cure the incurable and orchestrate this entire night. But why her? One of the doctors asked, his accent placing him somewhere Sarah had never been. Why this girl? "Maybe," Evelindra said softly, "that's exactly the question we should be asking." Lucian's gaze hadn't left Sarah's face. She could feel him cataloging everything: her worn clothes, her thin frame, the way she held herself small as if apologizing for existing. "Tell me about yourself," he said, and it wasn't quite a command, but Sarah found herself answering anyway. The words tumbled out: about her parents dying 2 years ago, about Lily, about the streets and the cold and the constant fear, about the bridge where they slept and the $7 she'd made tonight that wouldn't be enough. She talked until there was nothing left to say, until she'd laid her whole miserable story at the feet of these strange, beautiful people in their impossible castle. When she finished, Lucian's expression had transformed into something Sarah couldn't name. The woman, Evelindra, was sitting fully upright now, looking stronger with each passing moment, and tears tracked down her perfect face. "I need to go," Sarah said, the weight of their attention crushing her. "My sister is waiting." "I've been gone too long." "No." Evelindra's voice stopped her at the door. "No child should sleep in the cold. Not tonight. Not any night." She held out her hand to Sarah, an invitation and a promise. "Bring your sister here. Now. Let us repay the life debt we owe you." Lucian sent Sarah back in a car that cost more than most houses, with the elegant woman, her name was Celeste, she'd finally said, as an escort. Sarah pressed her face against the window as they glided through the city, hardly believing any of it was real. The $500 had appeared in her account after all, along with a message, for services rendered. More to come. The bridge looked even more desolate after the manor's splendor. Sarah found Lily exactly where she'd left her, curled in the sleeping bag, and her heart stopped at the sound coming from her sister's chest. The cough was worse, wet and rattling, each breath a struggle. "Lily?" Sarah dropped to her knees, pulling back the sleeping bag. Her sister's face was flushed with fever, her lips tinged blue in the streetlight. "Cold," Lily whispered. "Sarah, I'm so cold." Sarah had spent 2 years making impossible decisions, weighing dangers against survival, calculating risks in the currency of desperate hope. But looking at her sister's fevered face, there was no calculation at all. "We're going somewhere warm," Sarah said, gathering Lily into her arms. "Somewhere safe." Celeste helped them into the car without a word, and if she noticed how light Lily felt, how the 12-year-old weighed barely more than a child half her age, she had the grace not to mention it. Dr. Theron was waiting when they arrived. He was ancient and kind, with hands that moved with supernatural precision as he examined Lily in a room that looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility. Sarah watched him work, noting things she hadn't seen before, the way he moved too smoothly, the way his eyes reflected the light wrong, the complete absence of breath when he held still. "Pneumonia," he said finally, his accent placing him somewhere in Eastern Europe centuries ago. "Chronic respiratory damage from prolonged exposure and malnutrition. But treatable, especially here." He smiled at Sarah, and his teeth were perfectly normal. "Your sister will recover. You have my word." They were given a suite of rooms that Sarah's mind refused to process as real. Beds with sheets soft as clouds. A bathroom with a tub deep enough to drown in and water that ran hot without sputtering. Windows that looked out over gardens turned silver by moonlight. Lily fell asleep almost immediately in a bed meant for royalty, her breathing already easier with the medication Dr. Theron had administered. Sarah stood in the shower for 20 minutes, watching 2 years of street grime spiral down the drain, and cried silently into her hands. Over the following days, as Lily slowly healed, the truth emerged in careful conversations. Lucian told her himself in the library that smelled of old leather and older secrets, his winter storm eyes watching for her reaction. "We're vampires," he said simply. "All of us. This has been our home for 3 centuries. Sarah should have been terrified. Should have grabbed Lily and run. But she thought of Dr. Theron's gentle hands healing her sister, of Evelindra's tears when Sarah told her story, of the servants who'd brought them food and never once looked at them with the disgust Sarah had grown used to on the streets. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. Lucian's smile was sad. "We're rarely what anyone expects. We're not monsters, Sarah. We're people who live longer and differently, but people nonetheless." He explained their world in pieces she could digest, a hidden society existing alongside humanity, governed by ancient laws and older loyalties. He spoke of the careful balance they maintained, taking only what they needed, preserving human life, living in shadow to avoid the chaos revelation would bring. And he told her about Casimir Valdrin. "He believes vampires should rule openly," Lucian said, his voice hardening. "That humans are lesser beings meant for subjugation. He poisoned Evelindra with a curse designed to be incurable. 12 of the greatest vampire physicians in the world tried and failed. Your arrival with that cure should have been impossible." "Then who sent it?" Sarah asked. "Someone powerful enough to break Casimir's curse and orchestrate your presence at the exact moment we needed you." Lucian leaned forward, intensity burning in his gaze. "Someone with plans we don't yet understand." He offered her employment then, managing the manor's charitable foundation, using her street knowledge to actually help the vulnerable instead of performing charity theater. Real work with real pay and a real home for her and Lily. Sarah accepted before he finished asking. That night, she dreamed for the first time. The woman appeared in darkness threaded with starlight, her hair spilling like ink across the void, her eyes holding galaxies Sarah had never seen. She didn't speak, only watched Sarah with an expression of infinite patience, as if she'd been waiting for exactly this moment across countless ages. Sarah woke with symbols burning behind her eyes, a crescent moon cradled within a blazing sun, a serpent swallowing its own tail in an endless loop, 2 hands clasped across an infinite void. She found a notebook in the desk and began to draw, her hand moving with certainty she didn't understand, filling pages with images from a dream she couldn't forget. In the bed across from hers, Lily slept peacefully, her breathing clear for the first time in months. Outside the window, the moon hung full and bright, and Sarah could have sworn she saw someone standing in the garden below, a woman with ink-black hair who smiled up at her window before dissolving into shadow. Sarah pressed her hand against the glass and felt the future moving beneath her skin like something alive, patient, inevitable. "Who are you?" she whispered to the empty room. The moon offered no answers, but Sarah knew with strange certainty that she would find them soon enough. 3 weeks passed like a dream Sarah kept expecting to end. Lily transformed before her eyes, color returning to her cheeks, laughter bubbling up from lungs that finally worked properly, running through the manor's halls with an energy Sarah had forgotten her sister possessed. The sound of it echoed through corridors that Dr. Theron said had been silent for centuries, and more than once Sarah caught ancient vampires smiling at the noise like they'd forgotten what joy sounded like. The foundation work came naturally to Sarah in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. She knew where the real need lived, knew the difference between people performing poverty for sympathy and genuine desperation. She could spot the gaps in the system that swallowed people whole, could identify which shelters were safe and which were hunting grounds for predators. Within 2 weeks, she'd reorganized the entire operation, directing resources where they'd actually make a difference instead of funding vanity projects for the wealthy to feel charitable. Evelindra spent hours with her, teaching her about vampire society with the patience of someone who'd lived centuries and learned that wisdom couldn't be rushed. They took tea in the garden where moonflowers bloomed only at night, and Evelindra spoke of history like she'd witnessed it personally, because she had. She treated Sarah as an equal despite Sarah's constant internal refrain that she didn't belong here, that any moment someone would realize the mistake and send her back to the bridge. "You carry yourself like you're apologizing for taking up space," Evelindra said one evening, her green eyes kind but direct. "Stop. You saved my life. You belong here as much as any of us." Sarah wanted to believe her. Some days, she almost did. Then Casimir arrived. The household went rigid with tension the moment the messenger came. Lucian's face turned to stone as he read the formal notice, an ancient vampire lord requesting permission to enter another's territory, a courtesy that was more threat than politeness. Sarah watched from the gallery above the throne room as Casimir made his entrance. He was beautiful the way a sword was beautiful, all sharp edges and lethal grace. Golden eyes swept the assembled vampires, with contempt barely masked by civility. His clothes were expensively tailored, his movements precise, and everything about him screamed predator. "Lucian." Casimir's voice was silk wrapped around steel. "How remarkable to find you still playing lord of this crumbling estate." And even more remarkable, his smile was a blade, to find Evelindra in such robust health. "The last I heard, she was dying from a rather unfortunate affliction." "Your concern is touching," Lucian replied, his tone neutral ice. "But as you can see, she's recovered." "Indeed." Casimir circled the throne like a shark. "One might even call it miraculous. 12 of our finest physicians declared the curse incurable. And yet here she stands, radiant as ever. I find myself desperately curious about what changed. Some mysteries are better left unsolved." "How unlike you, Lucian. You've always been so eager to share your philosophies about transparency and cooperation." Casimir's gaze swept the room, cataloging every face, lingering on the servants standing at attention. Sarah pressed herself against the gallery railing, trying to become invisible, a skill she'd perfected on the streets. His golden eyes passed over her, dismissed her as irrelevant in her plain clothes, and moved on. Sarah released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "If you've come seeking information I won't provide," Lucian said, standing from his throne, "then this audience is concluded." Something dangerous flickered in Casimir's expression. "I came to remind you that secrets have a way of surfacing, old friend. And when they do, those who've been hoarding them often find themselves on the wrong side of history." He sketched a mocking bow. "Do give Evelindra my regards. I'm so pleased she's recovered." The silence after he left was suffocating. Lucian called Sarah to his study immediately. Evelindra was already there, her face tight with worry. "Casimir cursed me," Evelindra said without preamble. "The poison was his design, meant to weaken Lucian's position by slowly killing me. To prove that Lucian's philosophy of coexistence with humans makes us vulnerable." "The vampire world is divided," Lucian continued, pouring himself a drink with hands that were almost steady. "My faction believes in living hidden, taking only what we need, preserving human life. Casimir leads those who believe we should rule openly, that humans are lesser beings meant for subjugation." Sarah's stomach turned cold. "And the cure I brought should have been impossible. Casimir designed that curse to be incurable specifically to humiliate me, to prove his point that my ways lead to weakness and death." Lucian's winter eyes found hers. "If he discovers you delivered the cure, he'll torture you for information about who sent it. Then he'll kill you. Worse, he'll use the cure's existence as proof that someone powerful opposes him, and he'll escalate his timeline for war." "But I'm nobody," Sarah protested. "I don't know anything. I just delivered a package." "You matter more than you understand," Evelindra said softly. "And Casimir is brilliant and ruthless. If he even suspects your involvement." "I'm assigning guards," Lucian interrupted. "For you and Lily both. Discreet, but constant." Sarah wanted to argue, to insist she wasn't important enough to warrant protection, but the fear in their eyes stopped her. These ancient, powerful beings were afraid for her, and that terror was more convincing than any argument. That night, the woman came to her dreams again. This time, she spoke. "You matter more than you know, child." Her voice was layered, multiple tones harmonizing impossibly. Her galaxy eyes held Sarah with unbearable tenderness. "Soon, you'll understand why you were chosen." "Chosen for what?" Sarah asked the dream. The woman smiled, sad and ancient and infinite. "To save them all." Sarah woke with tears on her face and symbols burning in her mind, new ones this time, more complex, urgent. She reached for her journal and began to draw, her hand moving faster, certain she was running out of time to understand what was coming. Outside her window, she could have sworn she saw golden eyes watching from the darkness, and the safety she'd found felt suddenly, terrifyingly fragile. The gathering was supposed to be a celebration, vampire lords and ladies from across the territory coming to witness Evelindra's miraculous recovery, to reaffirm their loyalty to Lucian's vision of peaceful coexistence. Sarah had stayed upstairs with Lily, not ready to navigate the politics and ancient hierarchies that filled the manor's great hall. She was reading Alice in Wonderland to her sister, Lily's head resting against her shoulder, when the screaming started. It came from below, sounds of terror and fury mixing with crashes that shook the walls. Sarah's body went ice-cold with a fear she knew intimately from the streets, the kind that said predators were hunting. Under the bed, Sarah whispered urgently, pulling Lily toward the hiding spot. "Now, and don't come out no matter what you hear." "Sarah." "Now." Lily scrambled under the bed frame just as the door exploded inward. The thing that entered wasn't the cultured vampire Sarah had grown used to. This was the monster from nightmares, eyes completely black, face twisted with inhuman hunger, moving with speed that defied physics. Blood stained its mouth and hands, and the smell coming off it made Sarah's stomach heave. It locked onto Lily's hiding spot with predator precision. Sarah didn't think. She threw herself between the creature and the bed, arms spread wide, knowing with perfect clarity that she was about to die, and not caring as long as Lily had one more second to live. The vampire lunged, and something inside Sarah broke open. Light erupted from her body, pure, searing, impossibly bright. Not heat, but radiance that felt like standing inside a star. The vampire hit the wall of light and simply ceased to exist, incinerated so completely that not even ash remained. But the light didn't stop. It poured out of Sarah like a flood breaking a dam, expanding in a sphere that rushed through the manor with the sound of 1,000 bells. She felt it flowing through walls and floors, felt it finding every hostile presence in the building's 7 assassins hidden among the guests. The light touched them, and they burned. It touched Lucian, Evelindra, Dr. Theron, the servants Sarah had come to know, and passed through them like warm rain, leaving them untouched, protected, bathed in something that felt like being loved by the sun. Then the world tilted sideways, and Sarah fell into darkness, so complete it swallowed even her fear. She woke to candlelight and the awareness that time had passed. How much, she couldn't tell. Her body felt wrong, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit anymore. Something vast and patient moved beneath her skin, waiting. Sarah. Lucian's voice was raw, exhausted with relief. He sat beside her bed, and the shadows under his eyes suggested he'd been there a long time. Thank God. 3 days. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Lily. Safe. Unharmed. She hasn't left the room next door. He reached for Sarah's hand, then seemed to think better of it. Sarah, do you know what you did? The memories flooded back, the light, the power, the sensation of touching every soul in the manor simultaneously and knowing instantly which deserved protection and which deserved annihilation. I killed them, she whispered. You saved us. All of us. Lucian leaned forward, his winter eyes intense. 7 of Casimir's assassins infiltrated the gathering. They would have slaughtered everyone in that hall if you hadn't stopped them. But Sarah, what you did shouldn't be possible. No human can channel that kind of power. No vampire could do what you did, that selective destruction, that level of control while unconscious. Evelindra entered then, and behind her came a woman Sarah had never seen. She was small and ancient, with skin like parchment and eyes that held the weight of centuries. She moved with a strange, stuttering gait, as if she existed slightly out of sync with time. Talia, Evelindra said softly. Oracle of Nyx. She's served the goddess for 1,000 years. Talia circled Sarah's bed, her gaze dissecting, seeing things that made Sarah want to hide. When she spoke, her voice was layered like the woman in Sarah's dreams, multiple tones harmonizing impossibly. The vessel awakens, Talia said. The homeless girl who carried miracles. The invisible one chosen to be seen by all. Nyx has marked you, child. Has poured herself into your mortal frame and made you her champion. I don't understand, Sarah managed. Nyx. Lucian's voice was reverent, odd. The primordial vampire. The first of our kind, born when the world was young. She's been dormant for millennia, sleeping in a divine realm beyond our reach. But she's awake now, and she's chosen you. Over the following hours, they explained in pieces Sarah could barely process. Nyx had watched Casimir's rise, had seen the coming war that would destroy both species. She'd sent the cure through means beyond mortal understanding, had guided Sarah's steps to deliver it, had waited for the perfect moment to awaken the power she'd been placing inside Sarah from that first night. You're her vessel, Talia said, beginning to circle Sarah again. A human who channels vampire divinity. Unprecedented. Impossible. Essential. The training began immediately. Talia was a brutal, patient teacher who spoke in riddles and poetry, but somehow made Sarah understand. In the manor's sealed practice chambers, Sarah learned to call the light without letting it consume her. Learned to create shields that could withstand anything. Learned to sense the supernatural, vampires registered as cold silver flames, humans as warm gold, and something else moved in the shadows that Talia wouldn't name. Sarah discovered she could move objects with her mind, could glimpse fragments of past and future when she touched certain items, could hear thoughts if she concentrated hard enough, though the cacophony made her nose bleed. The divine power fought against her mortal body constantly. It was like trying to contain lightning in a paper lantern. Every day, she woke feeling like she'd been torn apart and reassembled wrong. Some mornings she coughed up blood. Her hands shook constantly. Her eyes had changed, shot through with silver threads that caught the light. But she persisted. Because Lily was safe. Because Evelindra looked at her with hope. Because Lucian watched her train with an expression Sarah was afraid to name. And because every night, Nyx came to her dreams and whispered truths that Sarah was finally ready to hear. "You were invisible," the goddess said, her galaxy eyes infinite. "Perfect for carrying my light. No one watches the homeless girl. No one suspects the delivery woman. But they'll see you now, child. They'll all see you. The question is, are you ready to be seen?" Sarah thought of the bridge, of apologizing for existing, of 2 years spent trying to disappear. "Yes," she told the goddess. "I'm ready." The light inside her pulsed in response, patient and inevitable, waiting for the moment it would be needed to save them all. The news reached them through Lucian's network of informants. Casimir was moving. Not with stealth anymore, but with the confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. He traveled from house to house across the vampire territories, gathering allies with speeches that twisted truth into poison. "A human wields our goddess's power," his messengers reported him saying. "A mortal girl channels divine energy that should belong to our kind alone. This is not blessing, it's theft. It's humans attempting to enslave us using our own sacred gifts. We must act before they use this abomination to destroy us all." Sarah listened to the reports feeling sick. Her blessing, the power that had saved everyone she loved, was being weaponized into propaganda for war. "He's gathering an army," Evelindra said grimly, spreading maps across the war room table. 12 houses have declared for him openly. More are wavering. Lucian's household fortified. Ancient vampires arrived daily, warriors who remembered wars from centuries past, mystics who wove protective spells into the manor's foundations, strategists who planned for battles Sarah couldn't imagine. The manor transformed from sanctuary into fortress. Talia found Sarah in the training room, moving through combat forms that felt increasingly natural despite her mortal origins. The Oracle's timeless eyes held unusual urgency. "It's time," Talia said simply. "Nyx calls you home." The ritual took place in the manor's deepest chamber, a room that predated the building above it by millennia. Symbols covered every surface, the same ones Sarah had been drawing in her journal, now revealed as ancient prayers. Lucian, Evelindra, and Talia formed a circle around Sarah as she lay on an altar carved from a single piece of obsidian. "This will hurt," Talia warned. "Your consciousness will leave your body entirely. Some who take this journey don't return." Sarah thought of Lily sleeping safely upstairs, of the army gathering in the distance, of all the people who would die if she didn't do this. "I'm ready." Talia's chant was older than language, sounds that resonated in Sarah's bones. The world tilted, dissolved, and Sarah fell upward into infinity. Nyx's realm was impossible to describe in mortal terms. It was starlight given form, shadow made conscious, a place where time moved in all directions simultaneously or not at all. Sarah floated in the void, her mortal body left far behind, and understood with perfect clarity that she was nowhere and everywhere, in a moment that had always existed and would never end. Then Nyx appeared, and Sarah forgot how to think. The goddess was terrifying and beautiful, ancient beyond comprehension, yet appearing young, her form shifting constantly between ages and aspects. But her eyes were Sarah's own, the same shade of brown she saw in the mirror, and somehow that made everything more unsettling. "Sarah Mitchell," Nyx said, and her voice was the sound of stars being born. "The girl who apologized for existing. Do you know why I chose you?" "No," Sarah whispered, or thought she did. Speech worked differently here. Nyx circled her, and Sarah realized the goddess was smaller than she'd imagined, almost her own height when she settled into a single form. "Your suffering gave you empathy. 2 years on the streets taught you to see the invisible, to value every life, because you know how easily lives are discarded. Your poverty taught you that worth has nothing to do with wealth or power." The goddess reached out, touching Sarah's chest where her heart would be in her distant body. "And your love for Lily proved you could sacrifice everything for another. These qualities are rare in any being, human or vampire. You are perfect for what I need. Nyx waved her hand, and visions exploded around them. Sarah watched Casimir win, watched him reveal vampires to humanity in a moment of triumphant hubris. The war that followed was apocalyptic, billions dead on both sides, cities burned, the world reduced to ash and hatred. The few survivors huddled in bunkers, humans and vampires alike nearly extinct, and the earth itself seemed to grieve. The vision shifted. Lucian fell to an assassin's blade, and vampire society fractured without his unifying presence. The careful secrecy he'd maintained for centuries collapsed as warring factions exposed themselves through carelessness and spite. Again, the revelation again, the genocide again, the world drowning in blood. Then a third vision, fragile as spider silk. Sarah stood between two armies, glowing with divine light, and somehow her presence stopped the violence. Humans and vampires spoke instead of fought, learned instead of feared. The peace was delicate, constantly threatened, but it held. And in that future, both species thrived. You see it now, Nyx said. The only path where both humans and vampires survive requires a bridge between them. Someone who embodies both possibilities. Someone who proves the barriers are illusion. The visions faded. Sarah and Nyx stood alone in the starlight again. I offer you a choice, the goddess said, and her voice held genuine compassion. Accept my full power and become my living avatar. Save both species, but carry the weight of worlds on your mortal shoulders. Or refuse and return to your life with Lily. I will protect you both, give you safety and peace, but the war will come and the ending will be written in blood. Sarah thought of Lily's laughter echoing through ancient halls, of Evelindra treating her as an equal when the world had taught her she was worthless, of Lucian's careful explanations and the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, of servants who'd called her by name instead of looking through her like she was glass. She thought of the future where children played in ashes and the one where they played in sunlight. I accept, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the terror. Tell me what I must do. Nyx smiled, and it was infinitely sad and infinitely proud. Become what you already are. My champion. My vessel. My hope. The goddess opened her arms, and divine power flooded into Sarah like a star-going supernova. It rewrote her on a fundamental level. Every cell, every atom, every piece of her consciousness transformed. The mortal girl who'd slept under bridges burned away, and something new emerged from the flames. She became immortal while her body still breathed. Became capable of miracles and destruction in equal measure. Became bridge and guardian, human and divine, flesh and starlight woven together into something unprecedented. When Sarah opened her eyes in her body again, 3 days had passed. She sat up on the obsidian altar, and soft silver light pulsed beneath her skin in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her eyes had changed still brown, but shot through with flecks of distant stars, the same galaxies that swam in Nyx's gaze. Lucian stared at her with awe and something deeper that made her chest ache. Evelindra wept openly. Talia nodded once, satisfied. Welcome back, goddess touched, the oracle said. Now the real work begins. Sarah looked at her hands, watched starlight dance beneath her skin, and felt the weight of 2 species' survival settling onto her shoulders. She'd been invisible once. Now she would be seen by everyone. The war was coming, and she was ready. The challenge arrived on parchment that smelled of old blood and older hatred. Casimir's messenger delivered it with mocking ceremony, reading the words aloud in the throne room where Sarah stood among Lucian's war council. Meet me at the eternal throne in 7 days, or I will bring my army to your doorstep and slaughter everyone you've sheltered. Every human servant. Every wayward vampire. Every child. The messenger's smile was cruel. And I will broadcast the battle on every human media platform in existence. Let them see what monsters walk among them. Let the revelation you've spent centuries preventing unfold in blood and fire. It was perfect. brutal and perfect. Lucian had to respond or appear weak, had to protect those he loved, had to prevent the catastrophic exposure that would doom both species. "Tell Casimir I accept," Lucian said, his voice cold as winter. 7 days. The Eternal Throne. This ends there. The manor transformed into a war camp overnight. Allies arrived in waves, ancient vampires who remembered when peace was worth dying for, their faces scarred by conflicts that predated written history. Young vampires who'd grown up under Lucian's philosophy of coexistence, terrified of returning to the old ways of blood and dominance. Supernatural beings Sarah hadn't known existed, fae who owed Nyx debts from millennia past, werewolves who'd found sanctuary under Lucian's protection, witches whose ancestors had been saved by the Vampire King's intervention. Sarah trained until her body screamed for rest, then trained more. Talia pushed her to channel increasingly massive amounts of divine power, teaching her to shape the energy with precision instead of just releasing it in devastating waves. "You're a scalpel, not a hammer," Talia intoned during a session that left Sarah's nose bleeding silver light. "Learn to cut without destroying everything around the wound." Sarah discovered new abilities daily. She could sense the essence of any being now, their fundamental nature laid bare beneath whatever mask they wore. Vampires registered as cold silver flames tinged with the color of their intentions. Humans glowed warm gold. And when Casimir's spies tried to infiltrate the manor, Sarah felt them like discordant notes in a symphony, their malice obvious as a scream. On the 5th day, Dr. Theron made his announcement. He found Sarah in the training room, his ancient face split by a smile she'd never seen him wear. "Lily is healed," he said simply. "Completely. Her lungs are restored as if the damage never existed. She can run, play, live a full life." His eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Your sister is going to be fine, Sarah." Sarah collapsed against the wall and wept great, shuddering sobs that released 2 years of terror she'd been carrying. Lily was safe. Whatever happened at the Eternal Throne, whatever sacrifice Sarah had to make, her sister would live. That night, seeking solace from the weight of the coming battle, Sarah climbed to the manor's rooftop garden. The moon hung full and bright, and the night-blooming flowers Evelindra cultivated released perfume that smelled like peace. She sensed Lucian before she heard him. His presence registered as silver flame shot through with something that made her chest ache: concern, affection, carefully controlled longing. "You've been avoiding me," Sarah said without turning around. "Yes." His footsteps approached slowly, cautiously. "I have. Since the transformation. Since I came back from Nyx's realm." Sarah finally turned to face him. "Are you afraid of what I've become?" Lucian stood backlit by moonlight, and something in his expression made Sarah's breath catch. "Terrified," he admitted. "But not of your power." "Then what?" He crossed the distance between them, stopping close enough that Sarah could feel the unnatural cold that emanated from all vampires. Except with Lucian, it didn't feel cold anymore, it felt like coming home. "I'm falling in love with you," Lucian said, his voice raw with honesty. "Have been since the night you arrived carrying miracles, looking half-starved and wholly selfless. Every day since, I've watched you transform, not because of Nyx's blessing, but because you're finally letting yourself believe you deserve to exist. You're magnificent, Sarah. And I have no right to burden you with my feelings when you're facing a cosmic destiny and a war that could destroy everything." Sarah stared at him, then started laughing. It bubbled up from somewhere deep, free and genuine and bordering on hysterical. Lucian looked wounded. "I bare my heart, and you laugh?" "I'm sorry," Sarah gasped, trying to control herself. "It's just, I've been in love with you for weeks. Terrified to say anything because I'm a homeless girl who stumbled into your world by accident. What could I possibly offer a vampire king who's lived centuries? I've spent every night convinced you see me as a charity case who happened to be useful." "A charity case?" Lucian's voice rose with incredulity. "Sarah, you're Nyx's chosen champion. You carry divine power in your mortal frame. You've reorganized my entire foundation with more efficiency than I managed in decades. You make Lily laugh and Evelindra smile, and you've brought life back to halls that have been silent for far too long. I slept under a bridge, Sarah countered. I stole food from dumpsters. I'm 19 years old, and I don't understand half of what you talk about when you discuss vampire politics. And I'm a monster who's killed more people than you've met in your entire life. I'm older than most human nations. I drink blood to survive. Lucian reached for her hand tentatively, as if expecting rejection. We're both broken in different ways. Maybe that's why this works. Sarah laced her fingers through his, feeling the contrast, his skin cold, hers warm, both of them holding power that could reshape the world. We're ridiculous. Completely, Lucian agreed. Their kiss was tentative at first, then deeper as weeks of unspoken longing finally found expression. Sarah tasted moonlight and centuries on his lips. Lucian held her like she was something precious and breakable, even though she could level buildings with a thought now. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder than necessary, Lucian rested his forehead against hers. If we survive this, he whispered, I will spend eternity proving you deserve every happiness. Every moment of joy, every beautiful thing you've been denied. I'll give you the world if you'll let me. I don't need the world, Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. Just this. Just you and Lily safe, and a future where we're not constantly running or fighting. Then I'll give you that instead. They stood together under the stars, two impossible people finding wholeness in each other, while below them an army prepared for war, and above them a goddess watched with approval. 2 days until the eternal throne. 2 days until everything changed. But tonight, in this moment, Sarah let herself believe in possibilities beyond survival. Let herself imagine a future where love wasn't a luxury she couldn't afford, where she wasn't apologizing for existing, where happiness was something she deserved. Tomorrow, they would fight. Tonight, they had this. It would have to be enough. The eternal throne revealed itself at dawn. Though calling it dawn was generous, the hidden valley existed in perpetual twilight, as if the sun itself had agreed to look away from what transpired there. The amphitheater was carved from a single massive outcropping of black stone, its walls inscribed with names in a dozen dead languages. Every vampire sovereign for 5,000 years had their name etched here. Some were crossed out, their reigns ended in blood and betrayal. Lucian's army arrived first, taking position on the western side of the ancient theater. Sarah stood beside him at the head of the formation, Evelindra on his other side, and the three of them radiated enough power to make the air shimmer. Behind them stood warriors who'd fought in wars that predated recorded history, next to teenagers who'd never seen real combat. Humans who knew the truth stood shoulder to shoulder with vampires. Werewolves growled low in their throats. Fae wove shields of starlight. Witches chanted protections that made Sarah's divine senses sing. Then Casimir's forces emerged from the eastern entrance, and Sarah's breath caught. There were so many. Hundreds of vampires, maybe thousands, all moving with predatory grace. They wore the symbols of houses Sarah had learned to recognize during her crash course in vampire politics, ancient bloodlines that had ruled territories when Rome was young, families who remembered when humans built the pyramids. Casimir himself walked at the front, and Sarah understood for the first time why he was so dangerous. He was beautiful in the way a perfect weapon was beautiful, all sharp edges and deadly purpose. Golden eyes swept the opposing army with contempt, lingering on Sarah with particular hatred. He stopped at the center of the amphitheater, standing before the throne itself, a seat carved from obsidian that had crowned kings and condemned civilizations. Lucian. Casimir's voice carried with unnatural clarity, reaching every ear in the valley. How generous of you to accept my invitation. And you brought the abomination with you. How convenient. Speak with care, Casimir, Lucian warned, his hand resting on his sword. You're addressing Nyx's chosen champion. Champion. Casimir's laugh was poison wrapped in silk. I see a human who stole power that should belong to our kind alone. A mortal girl wielding divine energy meant for vampires. This is theft, Lucian. This is humans attempting to enslave us using our own sacred gifts. He turned to address both armies, his speech magnificent and terrible. For centuries, we've hidden in shadows while humans multiplied and spread like a plague. We've taken only what we needed, preserved their lives, pretended we were equals. But this, he gestured at Sarah with disgust, this proves their true intentions. They don't want coexistence. They want dominion. They want to use our goddess's power to subjugate us. Sarah felt doubt ripple through some of Lucian's allies. Casimir's rhetoric was skilled, twisting truth just enough to make his lies sound reasonable. "Surrender the girl to me," Casimir demanded, his golden eyes fixed on Lucian. "Let vampire justice decide her fate. Or I'll take her by force, and then I'll broadcast this battle to every human media platform in existence. Let them see what walks among them. Let revelation come in blood and fire. Let chaos decide the future." "No," Lucian said simply. Sarah felt his resolve like iron, but she also felt something else through their growing bond, his fear that he couldn't protect everyone he loved, his certainty that this would end in devastating violence. She stepped forward before he could stop her. Silence fell like a physical weight. Thousands of eyes fixed on her, some hostile, some curious, all waiting. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she said, and her voice carried Nyx's layered authority, reaching every corner of the valley. 6 weeks ago, I was sleeping under a bridge with my sister, wondering if we'd survive the winter. I was 19 years old, homeless, invisible. Society had decided I was trash to be discarded and forgotten. She walked toward the center of the amphitheater, slowly, letting them all see her clearly. Then a goddess chose me. Not despite my humanity, but because of it. My suffering taught me empathy. My poverty taught me the value of every life. My love for my sister proved I could sacrifice everything for another. Sarah stopped halfway between the armies, standing alone. Casimir calls me an abomination. A thief. But I didn't steal anything. I was given a gift because Nyx saw something worth saving, not just in me, but in all of us. Human and vampire both. She turned, addressing Casimir's army directly. "The division between our species is artificial. We're not as different as you've been told. Vampires love, grieve, hope, fear, everything humans do. And humans are capable of the same nobility, the same sacrifice I've seen from every vampire in Lucian's household." Her voice rose, passionate and urgent. "So I have one question for all of you. Do you want to build a future or destroy each other trying to claim the ashes? Because that's the choice. Not vampire supremacy or human dominion. Those paths lead to extinction for both species. The only future where we all survive is the one where we choose cooperation over conflict." She saw it happening, vampires and Casimir's army shifting uncomfortably, doubt creeping across faces that had been certain moments ago. Ancient warriors looking at each other and wondering if they were truly fighting for survival or just for pride. Casimir's face twisted with rage. "Enough of this manipulation. She uses divine power to cloud your minds, to make you forget what you are, apex predators, not cattle farmers." He raised his hand, and his army tensed. "Take her. Kill anyone who stands in your way." Hundreds of vampires charged. Sarah raised her hands and released everything Nyx had given her. Light exploded from her body in a sphere that expanded faster than thought, pure and searing and absolutely controlled. It swept across both armies, and where it touched, vampires froze mid-stride, not harmed, but held perfectly still by divine will made manifest. The silence was absolute. Not a single being in the valley could move except Sarah. She walked between the frozen armies, touching vampires gently on their shoulders, their faces, their clenched fists. Each touch let them feel what she felt, Nyx's blessing, the goddess's vision of unity, the possible future where both species thrived. Tears streamed down warriors' faces as they glimpsed what could be. Sarah heard their thoughts despite the paralysis, wonder, grief for all the years wasted fighting, hope that maybe, just maybe, there could be something better. She reached Casimir last. He stood frozen mid-charge, golden eyes wide with shock and fury, and the dawning realization that he'd miscalculated everything. "You wanted proof of divine power," Sarah said softly, her hand on his chest above his heart. "Here it is. Not theft. Not manipulation. Just love offered freely to all who'll accept it." She released the hold, and two armies collapsed to their knees, gasping. The war hadn't ended, but in that moment, watching hardened warriors weep and embrace across battle lines, Sarah knew it could. Sarah released her hold and staggered, the effort of containing that much power leaving her trembling. Silver light still pulsed beneath her skin, but fainter now, exhausted. She'd demonstrated what she needed to, that power alone solved nothing. The choice had to be made freely. She stepped back and waited. Across Casimir's army, vampires lowered their weapons. Some dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by what they'd experienced. Others turned to their neighbors, warriors who'd stood beside them for centuries, and saw them clearly for the first time, understanding the cost of the ideology they'd been following. "This is madness," one ancient vampire said, his voice breaking. "I've fought for 1,000 years, and I never questioned why." But now he looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "Now I wonder if we've been fighting the wrong war." More weapons hit the ground. The defections rippled through Casimir's forces like a wave, half his army simply refusing to fight after touching something so much larger than their grievances. But Casimir himself stood at the center of the amphitheater, golden eyes blazing with fury that went beyond reason. He'd built his entire identity on vampire supremacy, on the conviction that humans were lesser. Sarah's existence, her power, her compassion, her goddess-blessed humanity, shattered everything he'd believed for millennia. "No," he snarled. "This is illusion. Manipulation. I will not." He transformed mid-sentence. His beautiful human facade ripped away, revealing the true vampire beneath, something from nightmares and ancient fears. His body elongated, bones cracking and reforming. His face became a horror of fangs and shadows, eyes burning like molten gold. Claws erupted from his fingertips, each one capable of tearing through steel. He moved faster than Sarah could track, a blur of savage violence aimed directly at her heart. Lucian intercepted him. The collision shook the ground. Two ancient vampires, both transformed into their true forms, clashed with force that sent shockwaves through the valley. Casimir's savage power met Lucian's controlled precision, and they were perfectly, terribly matched. They fought across the amphitheater in a dance of death that had been choreographed over centuries of rivalry. Lucian's blade carved silver arcs through the air. Casimir's claws left gouges in the black stone. They moved so fast they were barely visible, blurs of violence that only other vampires could fully perceive. Around them, smaller battles erupted. Those still loyal to Casimir's cause, the true believers who'd rather die than admit they were wrong, launched themselves at Lucian's forces. Sarah threw up shields of light, protecting the vulnerable. A young vampire who couldn't have been more than 16 cowered behind her barrier while ancient warriors clashed overhead. Human servants found themselves surrounded by divine radiance that turned aside blows meant to kill. She moved through the battlefield, healing the wounded regardless of which side they'd fought on, her hands glowing silver as she knit flesh and bone. Evelindra fought back-to-back with Talia, the vampire queen's blade work synchronized perfectly with the oracle's mystical defenses. They carved a path through the chaos, protecting those who'd chosen peace. Lucian and Casimir's battle intensified. They crashed into the eternal throne itself, the impact cracking the ancient obsidian. Casimir's claws found Lucian's shoulder, drawing black blood. Lucian's blade opened a wound across Casimir's ribs that would have killed anything mortal. Finally, Lucian found his opening. He drove his blade through Casimir's chest with surgical precision, piercing the heart without destroying it, and used the momentum to slam the ancient vampire backward, pinning him to the throne itself. Casimir screamed, rage and pain and disbelief mixing into something inhuman. He clawed at the blade, at Lucian, but the position was perfect. He was defeated, pinned like an insect. Lucian raised his sword for the killing strike. Decapitation. The only way to truly end a vampire this old. Wait. Sarah's scream cut through the chaos. Everything stopped. The remaining fighters froze, shocked by the command in her voice. Lucian held his blade raised, looking at Sarah with confusion and barely contained fury. Sarah ran to them, dropping to her knees before Casimir's pinned form. The monster who'd tried to enslave her species, who'd poisoned Evelindra, who'd nearly triggered a genocidal war, she knelt before him like a supplicant. "You have a choice," Sarah said, her voice gentle despite everything. "Redemption or destruction." Casimir laughed, the sound wet and broken. "The human offers me mercy? How quaint." "Nyx showed me the futures," Sarah continued, ignoring his mockery. "In the timelines where you die here, you become a martyr. Your followers rally around your memory, and worse leaders rise, ones without your intelligence, without your strategic mind, just pure hatred and violence. The war comes anyway, and it's even more terrible." She reached out, touching his face despite Lucian's warning growl. "But in the futures where you live, where you choose differently, where you use your power and influence to help build instead of destroy, the peace holds. Both species survive. Thrive, even." Casimir stared at her, his golden eyes showing the first flicker of something other than hatred. "Why would I help build a world I despise?" "Because you're better than the worst thing you've done," Sarah said simply. "You can be the villain who nearly destroyed everything, or the reformed warrior who helped save both species. Your story isn't finished unless you choose to end it here." Silence stretched across the battlefield. Everyone waited for Casimir's response. "Why?" he finally whispered, and the word held genuine incomprehension. "I tried to kill you. I would have enslaved your entire species. Why offer me anything but death?" Sarah thought of the bridge, of being invisible and discarded, of how Nyx had seen worth where society saw trash. "Because the goddess taught me that everyone deserves the chance I received, to be seen as more than the worst thing about them. I was homeless, and people looked through me like I didn't exist. You're a monster, and everyone sees only the terrible things you've done. But maybe," her voice caught, "maybe we're both more than that." Tears tracked down Casimir's transformed face, silver against shadow. Something ancient and hard cracked inside him, centuries of certainty crumbling under the weight of unearned mercy. Lucian looked at Sarah, then at his blade, then slowly, so slowly, withdrew it from Casimir's chest. Casimir slumped to the ground, defeated not by violence, but by compassion he couldn't comprehend, couldn't dismiss, couldn't escape. The war ended not with blood, but with a broken vampire lord weeping before a homeless girl who decided mercy was stronger than vengeance. In the aftermath of the Eternal Throne, everything changed in ways both immediate and glacial. Casimir retreated with a handful of followers who couldn't abandon him even after everything, but 3 days later a messenger arrived bearing words no one expected. "I will honor a ceasefire. The human's mercy haunts me in ways violence never could. I need time to understand what it means." The majority of his former army didn't retreat. They stayed, joining Lucian's cause with the fervor of converts who'd glimpsed truth after lifetimes of believing lies. Ancient warriors knelt before Sarah and pledged themselves to the fragile peace she represented. At the Eternal Throne, witnessed by hundreds of vampires and the handful of humans who knew the truth, they forged the Treaty of Two Worlds. Sarah stood at its center, living symbol, bridge between species, proof that the barriers dividing them were always more illusion than reality. Her name was carved into the black stone beside the names of sovereigns, the first human to be so honored, marking the moment everything shifted. Lucian began the delicate work of revelation. Not the catastrophic exposure Casimir had threatened, but careful introductions to trusted human leaders, presidents who'd proven their integrity, scientists who'd dedicated lives to understanding rather than destroying, activists who'd fought for unity across other divides. Each conversation was a negotiation, a risk, a leap of faith. This will take decades, Lucian told Sarah after a particularly grueling session with a human diplomat who'd needed 6 hours to move from terror to cautious acceptance. Maybe centuries. Some will never accept it. Then we have time, Sarah replied, her hand finding his. And we start anyway. Sarah became an ambassador between worlds, speaking to vampire councils and human organizations about possibilities that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. Not everyone listened. Some humans called for vampire extinction the moment they learned of their existence. Some vampires still longed for the old ways of dominance, meeting in secret to plot resistance. But enough people on both sides heard the message and chose hope over fear. Lily grew up as the first human child raised openly among vampires, calling Evelindra aunt and racing through ancient halls with vampire children who'd lived decades, but played with the same innocent joy. She became a symbol herself, proof that coexistence wasn't just possible but natural, if you raised children to see people instead of categories. Dr. Theron opened a medical facility where vampire and human doctors worked side by side, their collaboration yielding breakthroughs neither species could have achieved alone. Vampire regenerative abilities studied alongside human medical innovation produced treatments that saved lives on both sides of the divide. Years passed. Some days brought victories, another vampire house joining the treaty, another human community accepting their supernatural neighbors. Other days brought setbacks, attacks from extremists on both sides, political resistance, the slow grinding work of changing minds that had been closed for millennia. But the trajectory was clear. Change wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. Sarah still dreamed of Nyx, the goddess offering guidance for challenges yet to come. The visions were gentler now, less urgent, as if Nyx trusted Sarah to find her own way, while remaining available when the path grew too dark to navigate alone. Sarah's relationship with Lucian deepened into something that transcended species entirely. Their bonding ceremony, part wedding, part coronation, entirely unprecedented, was attended by humans and vampires alike. They exchanged vows in ancient languages and modern ones, promising futures neither could have imagined when Sarah first knocked on those massive oak doors carrying miracles she didn't understand. On the manor's rooftop garden where they'd first confessed their love, Sarah and Lucian stood watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire and gold. She could tolerate sunlight now, one of many changes Nyx's blessing had wrought, while Lucian never could. So they met in the liminal space of dusk, where day and night shared the same sky. Below them, Lily's laughter drifted up from the garden where she and Evelindra taught a mixed class of human and vampire children. The sound was bright and pure, untainted by the prejudices that had nearly destroyed both species. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucian asked, sensing the contemplative direction of Sarah's thoughts. "Accepting Nyx's blessing? The burden of what you became." Sarah considered the question seriously. The divine power still burned inside her, a constant presence that would never fully fade. The responsibility never lifted. She remained the living symbol of a peace that needed constant tending. Threats emerged regularly from those who preferred the old hatreds to new possibilities. But she looked at Lily's joy, at human and vampire children playing without fear of each other. At Lucian's hand warm in hers despite his vampiric cold. At the future they were building together, imperfect and difficult, but alive with possibility. "No," Sarah said firmly. "This is where I was always meant to be. Not because some goddess chose me, but because I chose to believe that being discarded by society didn't mean I was trash. You all taught me that." She turned to Lucian, cupping his ancient face in her hands that still bore faint scars from her time on the streets, reminders of where she'd come from, what she'd survived. Besides, someone had to prove that a homeless girl could save the world. Might as well be me. Lucian's laugh was soft and genuine. Might as well be you, he agreed. They kissed as the sun set and the moon rose, two celestial bodies sharing the sky in the brief moment when both were visible. Day and night. Human and vampire. Mortal and immortal. All existing together, all necessary, all belonging. It was a beginning, not an ending. The work of building a truly integrated society would take lifetimes, probably many lifetimes. There would be resistance and setbacks and moments when everything seemed impossible. But as Sarah stood there, blessed by a goddess and loved by a king, she understood one fundamental truth with absolute certainty. Salvation didn't come from power or position. It came from choosing compassion over hatred, hope over despair, love over fear. It came from small, invisible people deciding they mattered after all. It came from delivery girls who carried miracles without knowing it, from homeless teenagers who refused to let poverty define their worth, from those society discarded finding the courage to believe they deserved better. And it came from the audacity to imagine that the world could be different than it had always been, that two species destined for war could choose peace instead, that the homeless could become champions, that love could bridge any divide if people were brave enough to reach across the void. The story ended as it began, with Sarah carrying something precious through darkness toward light. But this time, she wasn't alone in the dark. This time, she carried hope for millions, and millions walked beside her, human and vampire both, building a future their ancestors couldn't have imagined. 12 doctors had failed. But sometimes the cure wasn't medical, it was having the courage to believe that even the most broken among us might be carrying exactly what the world needed. Sometimes salvation came from the place we least expected, the hands of those society threw away.